I dwell in places most do not see, not because they are hidden, but because they are ignored. The cracks between street lamps, the cold breath of a stalled elevator, the second before a scream. These are my thresholds. My kingdom is not forged of gold or steel, but of absence. A realm of glances never met, of rooms no one truly lives in, of silence that says far more than sound ever could. You might imagine it as darkness, but that would be inaccurate. Darkness implies something temporary, something that lifts with the dawn. No, where I reside, light has simply never been invited, and that suits me fine. I am the Dealmaker. That is what I am called, though I no longer remember who first gave me the name. I've worn it long enough that it fits as well as any skin ever could. I conduct no ceremonies, I hold no titles, but I have rules, and I obey them with the kind of reverence men once had for gods and graves. I keep my word, always, exactly, no more, no less. There is a pleasure in precision, in the crisp mechanical beauty of giving someone exactly what they ask for, and watching them realize, too late, that what they meant was something else entirely. But I digress. You want a story. Very well. Let me tell you of a man named Eli Morgan. Ah, you've heard of him. Most have. He asked to be remembered. Not for a season, not for a decade, but forever. And what a memory he became. They still speak his name even now, though not with reverence, with fear, with disgust, with fascination. The history, you see, does not concern itself with moral clarity, only with repetition. Eli was satisfying. A long game with a flavor that lingered. The kind of man who believed his conviction would spare him. It never does. Conviction is a mask, and I always wait for it to slip. But there are other hungers than legacy. Humans, for all their attempts at self-sufficiency, are not made to be alone. Strip away the noise, the distractions, the digital simulation of presence, and you will find a creature desperate to be seen, to be known, to be touched, even if only for a moment. Some chase fame for this, others religion. Some turn to love, and others to strangers in the dark. And sometimes in that dark, they find me. Let me tell you of another story, one of my more delicate arrangements. This is the tale of David Wren, a man who lost everything that tethered him to the world, and who, in his grief, made a simple, devastating request. I don't want to be alone anymore. I kept my word. Of course I did. There are many things that will unravel a human being. Starvation, shame, loss. But of all the torments I have witnessed, and I have witnessed far more than most, none work more slowly, more completely, than solitude. You see, humans are born towards others. Their very construction is a scream for connection, wailing, helpless, demanding to be held before even they understand what holding is. From breath one, they are reaching. Even in silence they speak. A glance, a flinch, the turn of a shoulder, a door left ajar or slammed shut. They're never not speaking, even when words fail them. I find that fascinating. Empires have risen and collapsed in the span of my observations. I've watched blood kingdoms burn and neon ones flicker out. And across all of them, from the tribal fires to the glass towers and blue-lit screens, one thing remains true. No one likes to be alone. They'll lie about it. Some even convince themselves. They'll say solitude is noble, peaceful, a sign of strength. But I've watched them in their quiet rooms, in their empty apartments, in their long walks home. I've heard the whisper in their chest they pretend not to feel. The ache that grows heavier each year. That dread of not dying, but of dying unseen. Oh, yes. Even the strong want someone to see them fall. Which brings me to David. He wasn't important, not in the way people think importance should be measured. No awards, no headlines, just a man. One among billions. A worn face, a quiet demeanor. The kind of person people describe as nice only because they can't remember anything else. But I saw him. David Wren, mid-40s, once a husband, once a father. Now, nothing. He had a life once. Not glamorous, but full. A wife, Anna, who made him laugh with just a look. A daughter, Maddie, who used to press stickers all over his briefcase before he went to work. He didn't deserve them, not in the sense of achievement, but they chose him, and that was enough. That was everything. Then came the accident. One of those stupid, brutal, absurd moments that mean nothing but ruin everything. An oncoming truck. A driver checking his phone. Flash of metal. Glass. Silence. They were gone, both of them. And David remained. For years he functioned, showed up to work, responded when spoken to, ate, showered, paid taxes. But he wasn't alive. He was a clock with a heartbeat. People stopped calling, friends faded. Not out of cruelty, just the inertia of living. They assumed he was managing, that he wanted space, that he was healing. He wasn't. He sat alone each night, dinner in front of the TV he never turned on. He spoke aloud to no one, just to feel the shape of sound. Holidays became unbearable, weekends worse, and through it all, the weight of no one noticing built like dust in a room that's been sealed too long. I watched him closely, not always, but enough. Enough to see the long spiral down. The way he'd pause before opening the door to his apartment, as if hoping there would be a sound inside. The way he lingered in grocery store aisles just to be near the voices. And then one night he cracked. He was sitting in a booth at a faded diner on the edge of the city. One of those places that looks the same in every decade. Linoleum floors, buzzing neon signs, a jukebox nobody touched anymore. He went there often. It was open late, and no one asked questions if he ordered coffee and stared at your reflection for 2 hours. That night, something in him broke loose. He opened his phone and searched, clumsily, drunkenly, for something absurd. Something he half remembered from a conspiracy podcast, or a whispered story from a message board. Something called the Dealmaker. I've never been sure where they first started speaking of me. It doesn't matter. Stories have a way of surfacing when I want them to. He found one of the usual sources. The ritual, it said. A guide. Summon the Dealmaker in 3 steps. Light a black candle. Speak your name backwards. Offer a coin from the year of your birth. Nonsense, of course. But charming. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. The ritual is not real. Not truly. There is no sacred geometry. No blood sigils, no correct time of night. The only thing that matters is intent. desire, undiluted. That's the beacon. If you call me, not casually, not jokingly, but from the bottom of whatever cracked part of your soul still aches, I will hear it. David Wren didn't know that. But in the booth, under jaundiced lights and the soft hum of a tired waitress wiping down a counter, he whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore." And I heard him. He lit nothing, offered no coins. He simply pressed his palms together, elbows on the table, head bowed like a man in church. He said it again. "I can't be alone anymore." The words trembled, not loud, but true. And in that instant, the booth across from him was no longer empty. He didn't look up at first. Didn't have to. The presence was undeniable, like heat from a fire you haven't lit, like static before the storm. He raised his head slowly and saw me there. Tailcoat, cufflinks, top hat, smile. Everything just so. He blinked and he rubbed his eyes. I gave him a polite nod. "Ah, David. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." David stared at me like a man waking from a dream he wasn't sure he wanted to end. His eyes weren't afraid, not really. Just tired. The kind of tired that goes beyond body and into bone. He looked at me the way a man looks at the last page of a book he knows won't end well, but keeps reading anyway. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used for anything meaningful in weeks. I smiled. "Ah, you know who I am." I didn't think this would work." "Yes, well, they never do," I said, gently adjusting my gloves. "But it did, and here we are." His eyes darted around the diner, but no one noticed us. Of course not. The waitress behind the counter was frozen mid-wipe, her hand hovering just above the countertop. A couple 2 booths away had their faces turned, locked in a loop of stillness. Time, you see, is terribly easy to persuade, when you know how. "It's not a dream," I offered before he could ask. I wasn't going to. "Ah, but you were wondering." He closed his mouth, nodding faintly. "I suppose this is the part where I have to say what I want?" "No," I said gently. "That part has already passed. You said it twice, in fact, and you meant it both times." "Right." I studied him, the hollowness in his cheeks, the crumpled sleeves of his jacket, and the faded mark where a wedding ring once lived. He was a man who had poured everything out of himself and still woke up dry. "You don't want to be alone. Not anymore." "No." "You want someone to notice when you walk in a room. Someone to say your name, to listen, to stay." His eyes began to water. He looked away. "You want presence, company, connection. Not once in a while, not briefly. Always." "Yes," he said, barely audible. "Always," I repeated. He nodded again, this time more firmly. "You understand," I said, tone softening. "This is not a temporary solution. It won't fade, it won't pass. You said never, and I take such words seriously." I meant it. Whatever the cost, I can't keep doing this. The silence, the emptiness, I'm not built for it. No one is. They just pretend better than you. So what? What now? Do I have to sign something and give you my blood? My soul? I chuckled, not mockingly. I do appreciate the classics. No need. Your will was enough. The deal is made. Just like that? I nodded. When you wake, you will never be alone again. David looked at me like he wanted to believe, but didn't dare. And what do you get out of this? Oh, I always get something, but that's not your concern. He hesitated, then asked, Will I be happy? A pause. I looked at him with the kind of warmth that can be mistaken for kindness, if you're desperate enough. You won't be alone. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. When he looked up again, I was gone. The booth across from him was empty. But for a moment, just a flicker, he could still smell smoke and old velvet. He could still feel the weight of eyes that had seen too much, and a presence that had never once broken a promise. Some wishes rot from the start. You can smell it. There's a scent to false desire. Bitter, grasping, frantic. But David's wish, it was clean, honest. Not pure, no, but raw in a way I find it deeply satisfying. He didn't want power. He didn't want immortality or adoration. He simply wanted someone. And he got everyone. It began, as these things often do, with something small. The waitress at the diner, Cora, paused at David's booth the morning after our meeting. She topped off his coffee and asked how he was doing. He blinked up at her, surprised. She'd never said more than hi before. I'm fine, he said. She smiled. You look like you could use some company. Mind if I sit for a minute? David looked stunned, then nodded. And just like that, she slid into the opposite seat, chatting about the weather, the weird regulars, her dreams of moving west. She didn't even seem to notice a line of customers building at the counter. When she finally got out to leave, she touched his hand gently. Come back tomorrow. It's nice talking to you. And just like that, he smiled. A real smile. It looked rusty on his face, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. I watched from the glass reflection above the counter. He felt seen. Over the next few days, it accelerated. At work, people who hadn't spoken to David in months suddenly dropped by his desk. They asked if he wanted to join for lunch, invited him to after-work drinks, asked his opinion on things. His. At first, he was awkward, guarded. He'd learned, after the loss, to keep a certain distance from the world. People left. They always left. But these people stayed. His inbox filled with messages. You free for coffee? Let's catch up. You've been on my mind. He started responding. One night, a neighbor knocked on his door. Young guy, mid-20s. Smelled like weed and desperation. Sorry, man, this is weird, but I don't know. You just seem like someone I can talk to. I do? Yeah, like you've been through some shit. You get it. David stepped aside and let him in. They talked for hours. The next day, another neighbor dropped off muffins. Said she felt like he needed something sweet. He laughed and took them and ate all 6. His home wasn't silent anymore. From my place in the shadows, I watched him begin to glow. He bought new clothes, started shaving again, even changed his curtains. He began to hum to himself. He took walks in the park and stayed out longer than he used to. People waved at him, stopped him to talk. A woman at the pharmacy said he had a comforting voice. A barista remembered his name after one visit and started writing encouraging notes on his cup. He didn't understand it, how this sudden web of attention had wrapped around him so quickly, but he didn't question it. Not yet. He was too busy basking in it. That's how it works, you see. People imagine the trap as some violent thing, sharp and immediate. But no. The best traps are warm, inviting. They feel like safety, like comfort, like home. Until they don't. There was a dinner party about 3 weeks in. That was the moment I knew he'd stepped fully inside the circle. He didn't throw it, of course. Someone else did. But somehow David was at the center of it. A dozen people, some of whom barely knew each other, all drawn together by him. They toasted to him, told stories about how much he'd helped them, how his kindness had meant something, how just being around him made things easier. He nearly cried right there at the table. When they asked for a speech, he gave one. Awkward, heartfelt, and trembling at the edges. I didn't think people like you still existed, or that I'd ever find them again. Everyone applauded. He was full. Not just fed, but filled. Surrounded by warmth. The sound of laughter, the glow of presence. He went home that night and stood in the middle of his apartment staring at nothing. He said aloud to the air, "Thank you." I heard it. Of course I did. The trap was well in place by then, and slowly, so slowly, the teeth began to press in. He didn't notice it at first. How the conversation started running long, how people lingered too much, how friends began texting at strange hours asking where he was, what he was doing, who he was with. "You've got such a calm vibe, I just feel better around you," they'd say. Then there were the unannounced visits. A co-worker stopped by with takeout, every night for a week, and said she just felt like he needed company. Another neighbor started showing up with laundry to fold together like old friends. Even at the diner, Cora began sitting with him before taking his order, then staying longer than she should. He laughed it off at first, called it a good problem to have. But I could see it. The edge of his patience fraying. The weight of it beginning to bear down. Not hostility, not fear. Just exhaustion. He had asked for connection and for company, and now it never left. I stood in the mirror once, watching him brush his teeth. He didn't notice me, of course not yet. But his shoulders were beginning to droop again. Not like before, when they'd hung with grief. Now they sagged with something heavier. Something constant. I smiled. The warmth he had begged for was no longer light. It was heat, pressure, noise. And he was only beginning to feel how hard it is to breathe when someone else is filling the air. There is a threshold between intimacy and intrusion. Most people never notice when they cross it, until they're already too far in. Until a kind word becomes a cloying one. Until company begins to feel like supervision. Until presence becomes pressure. David Wren had crossed that line. He just hadn't realized it yet. I did, of course. But I wasn't about to tell him. It began with the texts. At first it was sweet, Messages from friends. How are you today? Just thinking of you. Then it was morning check-ins, the lunchtime memes. Then evening, I just wanted to hear your voice kind of calls. And when he didn't respond fast enough, they followed up. You okay? Everything all right? You're not mad at me, are you? Every pause became suspicious. Every breath away from a screen an offense. He started waking up to 50 unread messages a day. Then came more drop-ins. Cora stopped asking before she visited. Who knows how she got his address? She'd show up with leftovers, stories, tears. One night, she cried on his couch for 3 hours about a man she barely knew, then asked if she could crash on his floor. A former coworker began showing up. Said he just felt better with David around. You don't have to talk, just be here. People brought their problems to David like cats dragging dead birds to the doorstep. A breakup, a panic attack, a lost job. You're just so grounding, they'd say. At first, David nodded, smiled, and listened. Then he started losing sleep. He tried taking walks to clear his head. Just 30 minutes of air, of quiet. But people followed. Hey, I saw you leave. Mind if I join? I was just heading this way too. You don't need to be alone, man. We've got you. At the park, strangers sat beside him on benches. Not just once, every time. They'd struck up conversation like they knew him. They didn't, of course, but they acted like they did. One woman leaned in close and whispered, You're the kind of person people gravitate toward. It's beautiful. He smiled politely, but inside something recoiled. He stopped going to the park. At home, things got worse. Someone left cookies at his door with no note. Someone else left a framed photo of the two of them. Only David couldn't remember who she was. Once, late at night, he saw a figure outside his window just standing there. When he opened the blinds, the man waved. Not threateningly, just watching. David didn't sleep that night. He started lying to people. I've got plans. I'm out of town. I'm not feeling well. It didn't help. They came anyway. Once a woman told him she dreamed he needed her. Another said she had a feeling he was sad. A man claimed he was just happening to be in the neighborhood, even though David had moved weeks ago. They always found him. Even at work, he couldn't get space. His office door, once closed without question, was now seen as an invitation to knock constantly. The shift in his posture was subtle, but I saw it. His shoulders crept inward again. His hands began twitching. He spoke less and smiled less. The circles under his eyes returned, deeper than before. He wasn't grieving anymore, he was drowning. One evening he went to a movie theater across town, alone in disguise. Hood up, no phone, paid in cash. He needed 2 hours without anyone. He sat in the back row and the theater was nearly empty. But halfway through the film, someone sat directly beside him. Not in the row, not in the same section. Right next to him. The man didn't speak, just sat, breathing evenly, staring ahead. David didn't move. He couldn't. After the credits rolled, the man turned to him and said, I just knew you wouldn't want to be alone tonight. David walked home in the rain. When he got back to his apartment, there were 6 people waiting inside. Friends, neighbors, a coworker. They'd used the spare key he didn't remember giving out. Surprise game night! One of them shouted. David didn't speak. He stood in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the tile, staring at their smiling faces. He said nothing. He didn't scream, but I could feel it. Something cracking, something important. And I watched. I was in the mirror behind the television, in the shadow under the kitchen table, in the space between David's heartbeat and his breath. He'd never asked to be alone again, and he wasn't. Not for a moment. And the beauty of it was only just the beginning. It took David 2 more weeks to break. He tried to hold it together, smiled when people showed up, answered messages with forced enthusiasm, even agreed to dinner invitations he didn't want. But the silence inside him was gone, and the noise never stopped. It was the constant proximity, the closeness, the sense that the world had no corners left unfilled. He left one morning without telling anyone. No phone, no note. He emptied out his wallet and took only cash. Boarded a night bus heading north. Some town with a name he couldn't pronounce, hours away from anyone who knew. And yet 5 hours into the ride, the man next to him turned and said, "I just had this weird feeling like someone needed company." David didn't speak. At the next rest stop, he waited until no one was looking and slipped off the bus. Walked 2 miles down the hallway in the dark. Hitched a ride with a trucker who didn't ask questions. He got off in a nowhere town, bought a burner phone and turned it off. Found a motel that took cash and didn't care what name he gave. For the first time in weeks, he breathed. The motel was cheap. Wood-paneled, musty, humming with some unseen bug. But it was quiet. Blessedly, painfully quiet. He sat on the bed and wept. He fell asleep with the television off and woke to a knock on the door. "Housekeeping. Just checking on you." He froze. Another knock. "You okay in there? Just don't want you to be alone for too long." He didn't answer and didn't move. After a long minute, the footsteps retreated. He waited and counted to 100, then gathered his things and climbed out the bathroom window. Over the next few days, he wandered from town to town. A diner here, a library there. Always hiding. Always pretending to be someone else. But it didn't matter because they always found him. Not the same people, never exactly that, but someone. A woman sitting across from him at a bus stop, knitting, suddenly said, "You look like someone who could use a friend." A gas station clerk said, "I don't know why, but I just can't let you leave without checking in on you." A child handing him a drawing with the words, "Don't be lonely." David stopped sleeping. He tried once, just once, to scream at them, to demand space. The woman he snapped at? She cried, apologized, said she didn't mean to intrude, said she just wanted to show him he mattered. Then she sat quietly beside him for 5 straight hours, saying nothing, breathing next to him and watching. He checked into a cabin in the woods. Remote, unlisted, no power, no signal. On the 3rd night, he heard voices in the trees. Not threatening, not violent, just calling his name over and over again, soft and patient. Smiling. And somewhere in the shadows beneath the floorboards, I smiled with him. David didn't return from the woods. Not really. He came back into society, yes. Staggered into a gas station on the edge of civilization after 4 days without food, his face gaunt, clothes torn from brush, eyes wide and glassy like a man who'd seen something he couldn't explain. He didn't speak. He just stood there while the cashier asked him if he was okay, if he needed help, if he'd been in an accident. When the man gently touched his shoulder, David flinched so violently that a shelf of candy bars collapsed behind him. He was still apologizing when the police arrived. He told them he wasn't lost. He told them he just needed to be alone. Over and over. "I need to be alone. Please let me be alone." That was all he said. They took him to the hospital first, ran tests. No drugs, no alcohol. No sign of trauma beyond dehydration and exhaustion. Then came the psychiatrist. Then came the transfer. The facility was clean, quiet, and state-funded. White walls, soft voices. Smiling staff with badges and clipboards who said things like, "Let's talk and you're safe now." They told him he wasn't in trouble. That he was being watched because they cared. That it was their job to make sure he was never in danger again, not even from himself. And so the final prison clicked into place with the gentlest of hands. David was not locked in a cell. There were no chains, but the attention, the attention was constant. A nurse visited his room every 30 minutes. Lights on, knock at the door. The therapist spoke to him for hours. Asked him about his childhood, his trauma, his grief. They wanted to understand him, dissect him, and fix him. They looked at him like a cracked porcelain doll they were trying to glue back together. With kindness, with pity, with need. Because that's what it was in the end. Need. They needed him to respond, to be open, to be present. Patients gravitated towards him, sat beside him in the lounge, uninvited. One woman followed him from group therapy to lunch to rec time without saying a word. Just walked behind him, humming and smiling, always near. He tried silence. That didn't work. Silence made them more concerned. They said it was a symptom. They logged it, adjusted his meds, scheduled more sessions. When he refused to engage, they didn't get angry. They got worried. They leaned in closer. They brought more people in. They whispered in corners about his progress and how he needed support. Everywhere he turned, someone was there. A hand on his shoulder, a voice in his ear, a smile across the table. He once hid in a supply closet for an hour just to feel air that wasn't shared, just to be still. They found him, of course, they always did. "You don't have to isolate," the nurse said, gently taking his hand. "You don't need to be alone anymore." He didn't respond, but I saw it in his eyes. Something pulling back into the skull, folding in on itself. He stopped trying after that. No more hiding, no more resisting. He sat when told. He walked when asked. He blinked when spoken to. He was compliant, quiet, present. Gone. And all the while, the world buzzed around him. Nurses laughing too hard, patients asking the same questions again and again. A low, humming symphony of people who meant well, who only wanted to help, who couldn't, for the life of them, leave him alone. They called it recovery, but I knew better. David Wren had been healed into nothing. He had been fulfilled completely, undeniably, and eternally. And not once did I break my word. Years passed. No one marked them, not really. Not even David. Time in the facility didn't follow the rules it did outside. Days didn't begin or end as much as they repeated themselves in slightly rearranged patterns. David sat through it all with a kind of eerie serenity. Not quite peaceful, certainly not content, but resigned. He spoke less, moved less, ate when they told him, nodded when prompted. But the light in him had long since gone out. He had become a fixture. Something dependable, something familiar. The nurses liked him. He never lashed out, never caused problems. Some even said he was their favorite. But no one noticed how often his eyes didn't move, how he never looked directly at anyone anymore, How the silence he once begged for had become a cathedral inside him, unreachable and sacred. And then one night, after lights out, after meds, after the hushed conversations of orderlies trailing off into the corridor, something changed. It was the smallest thing, a delay. For once, no one came. The hall outside his room, so often filled with footsteps, was silent. David sat on his bed in his thin cotton uniform, the blanket folded over his knees, just the way they taught him. He didn't move, he didn't speak, but he noticed. Oh, yes, he noticed. No one at the door, no voice on the intercom, no echo of staff down the corridor, just nothing. And then from somewhere beyond the wall, from some corner not marked by any light, came a sound. Not footsteps, not speech. A laugh. Soft, delicate, familiar. It didn't echo, didn't ring, didn't boom. It simply existed, like smoke curling beneath a doorframe. It slipped into the air and wound itself around David's ribs, and he flinched. Not visibly, just a twitch. A breath caught between inhale and exhale. His eyes widened a fraction. He knew that laugh. Oh, he knew that laugh, and he didn't need to see me. He knew I was there. He sat still as it faded. As the hallway outside returned to normal, soft footsteps and murmured voices, the shuffle of charts and routine. The laughter gone, the shadows settled. And yet something in him remained alert. I had visited, and he had felt it. That was enough. I left him, as I always do, quietly. There's no need for goodbyes, no need for theatrics. That's for the living. For those who still believe endings come with music and meaning. But the truth, the real truth, is that most endings are soft things, barely noticed. A light turned off in the next room. A sound that never comes back. David Wren got what he asked for. Every second of it. He was never alone again, not once. Not even in sleep, not even in stillness, and certainly not in the space that should have belonged to his final thought. I upheld my end. I always do. And people often ask, if not aloud, then in the quivering corners of their minds, why? Why grant the wish if the result is ruin? Why twist the gift into a weight too heavy to bear? Well, in the children's fable, why did the scorpion sting the frog? I can't help it. It is in my nature. It's what I do. It is my purpose. But you misunderstand. I do not twist. I do not ruin. I fulfill. To the letter, to the breath. To the final syllable of your most desperate want. It is not my fault that you ask without understanding what it is you're asking for. Loneliness is cruel, yes. But connection, unrelenting, inescapable, and total, can be far worse. You crave to be seen. But few ever ask what it means to be truly visible. Few consider what it costs to be known. David never did. And so his story ends like all the best ones do, not with fire, not with blood, but with silence. Surrounded by voices. As I return to my place between moments, my realm of near light and never quite dark, I feel it already. A flicker, a tremor, another voice raw with need. Another summoning. Careless or sincere, it does not matter. Intent is the key. And somewhere, someone is calling out for something. I'll answer soon. But for now, I wait.